the journalisms by way of critical aggregation, illuminated from the analytical research of a historiographer, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Engage impulse engines. Engage.
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 Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage.
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 Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage. Lebanon confronts Zionist border issues. So from Memo, Middle East Monitor, Lebanon Army forces Israel Army out of its border. The Israeli military were forced to retreat by Lebanese soldiers after violating a border pact over the blue line between Lebanon and Israel. A brief scuffle between the soldiers, after an Israeli soldier pushed his Lebanese counterpart, ended in a tense standoff before the Israeli soldiers were given orders to retreat. The Lebanese army said it forced the Israel army to retreat beyond the country's border with Israel yesterday. A military statement said an Israel patrol violated the blue line at the village Aita al-Shab in southern Lebanon. The blue line is the line set by the United Nations for the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Lebanon in 2000. The Lebanon army said a military unit intervened and forced the Israeli patrol to retreat beyond the blue line. According to the statement, a unit for UN peacekeepers, UNIFIL, arrived at the scene to verify the Israeli breach. There was no comment from the Israeli army on the Lebanese statement. Lebanon occasionally accuses the Israeli army of violating the Lebanese airspace and borders. And from aa.com.tr, Lebanon says forced Israeli patrol to retreat after border violation. There was no Israeli comment on the Lebanese statement. So in Beirut, Lebanon, the Lebanese army said Sunday it forced an Israeli patrol to retreat beyond the country's border with Israel. A military statement said an Israeli patrol violated the blue line at the village of Ait al-Shab in southern Lebanon. The blue line is the line set by the United Nations for the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Lebanon in 2000. The Lebanese army said a military unit intervened and forced the Israeli patrol to retreat beyond the blue line, According to the statement, a UN unit for peacekeeping called UNIFIL arrived at the scene to verify the Israeli breach. There was no comment from the Israeli army on the Lebanese statement. Lebanon occasionally accuses the Israeli army of violating airspace and borders. And from Newsroom Odisha, UNIFIL calls on Lebanon and Israel to maintain calm on the border. The UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon has urged the country and Israel to maintain calm following an incident on the demarcation blue line, the national news agency reported. Earlier on Sunday, the Lebanese Army Command said an Israel enemy patrol breached at noon the blue line near Lebanon's southern town of Aita al-Shab by about 1 meter prompted a Lebanese army patrol to force them to retreat back to areas beyond the line. UNIFIL is aware of the tensions that are occurring along the blue line in the Aita al-Shab, where some Israeli maintenance work is taking place, said Candace Ardell, Deputy Director of the United Nations Interim Forces in Lebanon Media Office. UNIFIL forces are the site and are seeking to reduce tension. We urge all parties and all those present at the scene to maintain calm, she said. The blue line separates the territories between Lebanon and Israel, drawn in June 2000 by the United Nations after the Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon on May 25, 2000, Xinhua News Agency reported. UNIFIL forces are deployed in southern Lebanon, and its area of operations is defined by the Litani River in the north and the Blue Line in the south, according to the UN mission's website. Resistance finds Israeli spy device in South Lebanon footage. The resistance in Lebanon announces finding an Israeli espionage device near the Palestinian-Lebanon border. The Islamic resistance in Lebanon announced that it had found an Israeli espionage device near the Al-Abad site on the Palestinian-Lebanese borders on Lebanon soil. The Lebanese army was on a high state of alert on Sunday at the border with occupied Palestine after an officer in the Lebanese army pushed an Israeli officer and uprooted an iron stake that the occupation was planting outside the blue line. UNIFIL forces intervened to de-escalate the situation and separate the two sides. Furthermore, earlier in the year, the Lebanese army prevented an Israeli bulldozer from operating outside the blue line at the borders of the settlement of Metula in southern Lebanon. Moreover, the Lebanese army fired on January 13th at an Israeli UAV that violated the country's airspace from the south. The Lebanese Internal Security Forces dismantled in early 2022 in the largest anti-spy operation in Lebanon over the past 13 years, consisted of 17 Israeli spy networks. Acting Minister of Information Abbas Halabi said Interior Minister Bassam Maulaoli disclosed during a cabinet meeting that 17 Israeli spy networks were uncovered in Lebanon following successive operations, noting that both played a role in the local and regional operations. The Lebanese Al-Akhbar newspaper reported that the Lebanese Internal Security Forces Information Branch launched a campaign in early January 2022 and had captured 20 members as of the end of January. Investigations revealed that at least 12 of those detained were fully aware that they were working for Israel, while others claimed they believed they'd been working for internal or international organizations and NGOs. The dismantling of these networks is one of the biggest security operations in Lebanon since 2009. The newspaper reported 3 spies said their employees ordered them to obtain real estate information to identify the names of real estate owners in different areas. They were also asked to rent apartments in several areas and leave their keys in certain places. Between 2009 and 2014, the Lebanese authorities arrested more than 100 people on charges of espionage for Israel. And from Mehr News Agency, tensions on Lebanese border with Israel regime flare report. According to the Lebanese El Nashra news website, the tensions rose after an Israeli regime officer pushed a Lebanese officer. Actually, this article, I'm not sure who pushed who because it says the Israeli regime officer pushed the Israeli regime officer. So we'll figure that out in just a moment, I suppose. And removed the metal stake that the Zionist regime soldier was placing on the ground in violation of the blue line. So it looks like the Israeli regime officer pushed the Lebanese officer and removed the metal stake. After the tensions between the two sides, UN peacekeeping forces intervened to prevent clashes. Israeli regime's media said the tensions rose along the Zionist regime's Lebanese border, and the Lebanese army was put on alert Sunday after reports that the Zionist military patrol crossed the frontier. A Zionist enemy patrol breached the blue line in an Ait al-Shab, that's a South Lebanon area, to a distance of approximately 1 meter. The Lebanese army said in a statement, according to media reports. The Blue Line is a temporary border published by the UN on June 7, 2000, after the Israeli regime's withdrawal from Lebanon. And from Jewish press, Israeli-Lebanese soldiers in physical confrontation at border. A Lebanese army soldier physically pushed an Israeli Defense Forces officer on Sunday at Israel's northern border, according to a report. At least one of the Lebanese forces who arrived at the site was from the country's intelligence directorate, as indicated on the back of his shirt in Arabic. According to Lebanese sources quoted in the report, the altercation took place when the Lebanese soldier pulled out of the ground an iron stake placed there by the Israeli military officer, and Lebanese forces said planting the iron stake was a violation of the international blue line that serves as the border between Israel and Lebanon. One soldier allegedly broke his weapon at the site, according to Ait al-Shab, who was at the border, and soldiers from the UN interim forces in Lebanon, that's the UNIFIL, the UNIFIL, were deployed to the site of the altercation. And Lebanese army patrol forces Israeli patrol to retreat after violating blue line. This is lbcgroup.tv. The Lebanese armed forces issued on Sunday a statement in which it mentioned that between 11:55 and 12, an Israeli enemy patrol breached the blue line that demarcates the border between Lebanon and Israel near point BP-13, Ait al-Shab, with a distance of approximately 1 meter. Thus, a Lebanese army patrol attended and forced the enemy patrol to retreat beyond the blue line toward occupied Palestine territory. However, a patrol from the United Nations interim force in Lebanon also attended to verify the breach. The breach issue is being followed up in coordination with the force mentioned above. Watch this space. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, and/or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Ankara summons American envoy over U.S. general's recent visit to northeast Syria. Turkish Foreign Minister asks U.S. Ambassador Jeff Flake to give an explanation about the visit of U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley to the areas occupied by the YPJ and the PKK terror group in northeastern Syria. Turkey has summoned the American ambassador to Ankara and demanded an explanation over U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley's visit to the regions occupied by the YPJ, the PKK terror group in northeastern Syria. Diplomatic sources told Anadolu Agency AA that Ambassador Jeff Flake was summoned to the Turkish Foreign Ministry on Monday over Milley's visit, says TRT World. Sources also said Flake was asked to give an explanation about the visit. Joint Staff spokesman Colonel David Butler told AA that General Milley visited northeast Syria today to meet with U.S. commanders and troops. While there, he received updates on the counter-ISIS mission and expected force protection measures and assessed repatriation efforts for the Al-Hol refugee camp, Butler added. U.S. support for the YPJ has long strained relations between Ankara and Washington. In its almost 40-year terror campaign against Turkey, the PKK, listed as terrorist organization by Turkey, the U.S. and the EU, has been responsible for the deaths of over 40,000 people, including women, children, and infants. The YPG is the Syrian affiliate of the PKK terror group. And from the Daily Sabah, Turkey summons U.S. envoy over general's visit to Syria's YPJ-held areas. The Foreign Ministry Monday summoned U.S. Ambassador to Ankara Jeff Flake over a top U.S. military officer's visit to a U.S. base in the area dominated by the PKK's Syrian wing, the YPJ said, diplomatic sources. The sources said that ministry sought an explanation for the visit. Army General Mark Milley, chairperson of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, made the unannounced visit Saturday to assess a nearly 8-year-old mission there and to review safeguards for U.S. troops against potential attacks. About 900 U.S. troops are deployed in several bases and posts across northeastern Syria. Similarly, the Syrian Foreign Ministry condemned the visit. Official news agency Sana quoted a foreign ministry official as saying, Syria strongly condemns the illegal visit of the American chairperson of the Chiefs of Staff to an illegal American military base in northeast Syria. Milley's visit was a flagrant violation of the sovereignty and integrity of Syrian territory, the official added, according to Sana, calling on the U.S. administration to immediately cease its systematic and continued violation of international law and support for separatist arms groups. The PKK is a designated terrorist organization in the U.S., Turkey, and the European Union, and Washington's support for its Syrian affiliate, the YPJ, has been a major strain on bilateral relations with Ankara. The U.S. primarily partnered with YPJ in northeastern Syria to fight against the Daesh terrorist group. On the other hand, Turkey has strongly opposed the YPG terrorist group's presence in northern Syria. Ankara has long objected to the U.S. support for the YPJ, a group that poses a threat to Turkey and terrorizes locals, destroying their homes and forcing them to flee.
Your inconsistencies are glaringly obvious.
Under the pretext of fighting Daesh, the U.S. has provided military training and given truckloads of military support to YPG terrorists, despite its NATO allies' security concerns. And from Daily News, that is HurriyetDailyNews.com, Ankara summons U.S. envoy over top U.S. soldiers' visit to North Syria. The Turkish Foreign Ministry has summoned United States Ambassador to Ankara Jeff Flake after the U.S. top soldiers' visit to northeastern Syria, where the U.S. troops are allying with the YPJ terror organization. According to diplomatic sources, Ambassador Flake was summoned to the foreign ministry on March 6 to get an explanation about the visit of Mark Milley, the U.S. Chief of General Staff, to southeastern Syria. Milley paid a snap visit to the region on March 4th, where he inspected the U.S. troops in the field with the YPJ under the title of the Syrian Democratic Forces. Turkey considers the YPJ as the PKK's associate in Syria and therefore terrorist. It's long been asking the U.S. to cease its partnership with the YPJ and start cooperation with the Turkish military in joint efforts to eradicate the presence of ISIL in the region. The U.S. maintains approximately 900 troops in Syria. While in the country, Milley also reviewed the ongoing repatriation efforts from the Al-Hol refugee camp, where it houses more than 60,000 displaced persons, including 25,000 children. And from yenisafak.com, Ankara summons Washington's envoy over U.S. general's recent visit to northeast Syria. U.S. Ambassador Jeff Flake summoned to Turkish Foreign Ministry on Monday over Milley's visit to regions occupied by YPJ and PKK terror group in Syria, diplomatic sources say. Turkey on Monday demanded an explanation over U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley's visit to regions occupied by the YPJ-PKK terror group in northeastern Syria. According to diplomatic sources, U.S. Ambassador to Ankara Jeff Flake was summoned to the Turkish Foreign Ministry on Monday over Milley's visit. Sources also said Flake was asked to give an explanation about the visit. Joint Staff spokesman Colonel David Butler told Anadolu that General Milley visited northeastern Syria today to meet with U.S. commanders and troops. While there, he received updates on the counter-ISIS mission, inspected force protection measures, and assessed repatriation efforts for the Al-Hol refugee camp, Butler added. The YPJ is the Syrian affiliate of the PKK, a designated terror organization in the U.S. and Turkey. U.S. support for the YPJ has long-strained relations between Ankara and Washington. And watch this space. We'll be back with more news. Israel to impose crossing closures in West Bank, Gaza during Jewish holiday. Israel occupation forces announced on Sunday that no crossing or checkpoints will operate from Monday until Wednesday, leaving the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip cut off, the Middle East Monitor reported. The decision comes as Israel prepares to mark the Jewish holiday of Purim Tuesday and Wednesday. Even humanitarian and other outstanding cases will require the approval of the Coordinator of Government Activities in the Territories, the COGAT, the Israeli authority in charge of Palestinian affairs in the occupied territories. According to the Times of Israel, the occupation said the border crossings for Palestinians were to reopen on Thursday, subject to a situational statement or a situational assessment. And from MiddleEastMonitor.com, Israel to impose West Bank Gaza crossing closures during Jewish holiday. Israel occupation forces announced yesterday that no crossings or checkpoints will operate from today until Wednesday, leaving the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip cut off. The decision comes as Israel prepares to mark the Jewish holiday of Purim tomorrow and Wednesday. The closures are standard practice during the Jewish national holiday of Purim, which the military claim is a preventative measure. Exceptions will be made for humanitarian and other outstanding cases. Still, they'll require the approval of the Coordinator of Government Activities in the Territories, the occupation force in charge of Palestinian affairs in the occupied territories. According to the Times of Israel, the occupation said the border crossings for Palestinians were to reopen on Thursday, subject to a situational assessment. The Israeli measures include the closure of all major roads, setting up military checkpoints, and the intensification of the army's presence, as well as the closure of all crossings around the Gaza Strip, tightening the siege even further. All such abusive and oppressive actions against Palestinians are said to be needed as a means of securing the celebrations of the settlers. Last year was the first year in 5 years in which a closure was not imposed on the occupied West Bank. These closures further damage and limit the growth of the Palestinian economy. Purim is celebrated every year on the 14th of the Hebrew month of Adar, which generally falls in late winter or spring. And from Barat Times, West Bank Gaza Palestinians to be banned from entering Israel during Purim. West Bank Gaza Palestinians to be banned from entering Israel during Purim. The Israel Defense Forces announced on Sunday the closure of crossings with the West Bank and Gaza Strip during the upcoming Purim holiday. The closure began at 5 p.m. on Monday, March 6th, and will last until 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, March 8th. The IDF said the border closing for Palestinians was to be reopened on Thursday, subject to situational assessment. Exceptions to the closure would be made for humanitarian and other outstanding matters, but would require the approval of the Defense Ministry's liaison to the Palestinians, known as the Coordinator of Government Activities in the Territories. Such closures are standard practice during festivals and holidays. The military says they are preventative measures against attacks in periods of heightened tension, but last year during the Purim, the army abandoned the general shutdown for the first time in 5 years. Since then, tensions have risen as Israeli forces have stepped up arrest raids and other counter-terrorist efforts in the West Bank following a series of terrorist attacks. This is all propaganda, that last paragraph. Wherein, this says, since then tensions have risen. Why have tensions risen? Who has created the tension? As Israeli forces have stepped up arrest raids. The term raids, these are attacks, there's terrorism, and other counter-terrorists. This frames the terrorist, the wrong group as terrorists, to be honest. In recent months, 14 Israelis have been killed and many more seriously injured in several Palestinian attacks in Jerusalem and the West Bank. At least 64 Palestinians have been killed. They've lost count. I'm sure it has to be 70 now. Since the beginning of the year, most of them in carrying out attacks or during clashes with security forces. That's more than one person a day this year. There has also been an increase in settler violence towards Palestinians in recent months. The fact that they call them settlers and to settle, I think they should be. There has also been an increase in occupier violence, in Zionist occupier violence towards Palestine in recent months. And from IMEMC, International Middle East Media Center, Israeli martial law authorities impose closure on West Bank. Now, already this language, just by the title, is probably more accurate. The imposition, the idea of martial law, and let's see what it says here. The military authorities that rule the Palestinian territories, West Bank and Gaza, under martial law, ordered a closure of all the parts of the West Bank and Gaza from the evening of March 6th through Wednesday, March 8th, while Jewish Israelis celebrate the religious feast of Purim. Although most Palestinians, apart from the Samaritans who reside in the northern West Bank, do not celebrate Purim, their lives are severely disrupted during this and every Jewish holiday when the Israeli military authorities control every aspect of Palestinians' lives, close the Palestinian areas, and enforce strict security protocols. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, the Purim holiday originated from a misunderstanding in 500 BC when rumors spread that the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, wanted to massacre Jews, but these rumors never came to pass, and instead, Jewish people living in Persia were given permission to massacre their self-declared enemies. Haman, chief minister of King Ahasuerus, incensed the Mordecai, a Jew, held him in disdain and refused obeisance. Convinced King Ahasuerus that the Jews living under Persian rule were rebellious and should be slaughtered. With the king's consent, Haman set a date for the execution, the 13th day of the month of Adar, by casting lots and built the gallows for Mordecai. When rumors of the planned massacre reached Esther, beloved Jewish queen of Ahasuerus and adopted daughter of Mordecai, she risked her life by going uninvited to the king to suggest a banquet that Haman would attend. At the mill, she pleaded for the Jews and accused this wicked Haman of plotting the annihilation of her people. Upset, the king stepped out into the palace gardens. On returning, he found Haman falling on the couch where Esther was. The king mistook Haman's frantic pleas for mercy as an attack upon the queen. The outraged king ordered that Haman be hanged and that Mordecai be named to his position. Esther and Mordecai then obtained a royal edict allowing Jews throughout the empire to attack their enemies on Adar 13. After an exhilarating victory, they declared the following day a holiday, and alluding to the lots Haman had cast, named it Purim. The secretary establishment in Israel decided on Sunday evening to impose a closure on the West Bank and Gaza Strip on the occasion of the Hebrew Purim holiday. This closure affects Palestinian workers trying to get to their jobs but being prevented by closed checkpoints, students unable to attend school, and all Palestinians trying to live their daily lives. According to Israeli media, the closure will start Monday at midnight and last through Wednesday. So this holiday's the story behind it is an excuse to attack and be violent. Yeah. And watch this space. We'll be back with more news.
Today's unemployment figures show the economy is moving in the right direction. The drop in unemployment is one more sign that the economy is strengthening.
And here's Rania Khalek on anti-Iranian propaganda.
Back to the issue of Lebanon, I think one of the ironies of the sort of Iranian occupation narrative, I mean, that you hear from certain segments of society here that are obviously just regurgitating what they're seeing in their respective in the media outlets that they're consuming. The irony is, of course, is that there is an occupation of Lebanese land still. And but can you tell viewers? Can you remind our viewers about the details of that? Because as far as I understand, it's not Iran that's occupying Lebanese land. It's another country.
Yeah, depends on who you ask. Again, yeah, it is actually quite interesting how a lot of people will tell you Iran is occupying Lebanon, when in fact, Lebanon has been a victim of Zionist terrorism and Zionist colonialism for almost 8 decades. So there are, parts of Lebanon that are still under Israeli occupation. Beyond that, or maybe I could just very briefly provide a historical context for the viewers, which would be interesting to know in this case. So Lebanon has been a victim, as I said, of Israeli colonialism since 1948, when the Zionist entity proclaimed its state in occupied Palestine. Almost 8 decades. So there are, parts of Lebanon that are still under Israeli occupation. Beyond that, or maybe I could just very briefly provide a historical context for the viewers, which would be interesting to know in this case. So Lebanon has been a victim, as I said, of Israeli colonialism since 1948, when the Zionist entity proclaimed its state in occupied Palestine, where it has established an apartheid regime and continues to kill the indigenous population. Lebanon has been under has been a victim of Israeli attacks for several decades, but has been under Israeli occupation from 1982 until the year 2000. Under Israeli occupation from 1982 until the year 2000.
These are facts, they're numbers. You can quantify this.
There have been several wars, including the 2006 war, a major military aggression of the Israeli regime against the Lebanese civilians and civilian infrastructure. And besides this, until today, there are numerous, on average, several daily violations of Lebanese airspace by Israeli military planes. And the Israeli regime continues to peddle a very genocidal rhetoric concerning Lebanon that includes openly genocidal intent and fantasy. So it is very clear how Lebanon continues. So it is very clear genocidal intent and fantasy. So it is very clear how Lebanon continues to be threatened by the Zionist regime, which again puts us into the situation where you actually have an ongoing colonial intention towards Lebanon that is not coming from Iran, but from the Israeli, from a Zionist entity, while at the same time this discourse or the presence of an alleged Iranian occupation continues to increasingly take more attention in the mainstream media. But of course, beyond the Israeli occupation, there's obviously a very clear U.S. influence in Lebanon, the presence of the United States in Lebanon. Obviously, also, if we think about the presence of the U.S. in Western Asia, the sanctions against Syria have a major impact on Lebanon, on its situation, on its partial isolation in the region. And then on top of this, as I already mentioned previously, the presence of NGOs, the NGOization of Lebanon, and many NGOs that are backed and funded by German political parties, for example, by the European Union, by Western regimes that are themselves aligned with the Zionist entity and are allies of these policies. So this so-called soft power of Western regimes is not to be underestimated, and yet.
And from Vanessa Beeley, this is her analysis of Syria at the Schiller Institute.
The weaken it so that it's unable or it's not as capable of coming to the full aid of Syria during this attempt to devastate and destroy Syria. The occupation of Syrian territories in the northeast, you have, of course, the United States, alongside its Kurdish Contra proxies. Along the northern border, you have Turkey via its own proxies, which we know, of course, to have been the relabeled Free Syrian Army and Al-Qaeda elements that are occupying a region of northern Syria at the northwest, which is occupied by Al-Qaeda, dominated by Al-Qaeda, which we know to be a US asset. Ambassador Jeffries termed it such during Trump's administration. Jake Sullivan wrote an email to Hillary Clinton in 2012 stating that Al-Qaeda was on the side of the United States during this regime change war. And in the south, of course, we have the historic and illegal annexation of the Golan territories by the Zionist entity. In my view, the occupation of these territories, the occupation of Palestine, is also a priority. The sanctions, in a sense, for me, are a symptoms of the cause. And the cause is the occupation, the illegal occupation of Syrian territory and Palestinian territory. Why do I say this? Because, in all honesty, when I speak to Syrians, the sanctions they can deal with, sanctions have been imposed upon them for decades, including, of course, for their so-called harboring of the PKK labeled terrorists at that point, now, of course, being weaponized by the United States against Syria. You have a situation now where the border crossings into Syria are completely under the control of hostile states, apart from one opening, which is Al-Bukamal in the northeast, which is regularly bombed by the Zionist entity, destroying humanitarian convoys even before the earthquake. And how has the Zionist entity responded to the humanitarian tragedy in Syria? It bombed Syria. In the early hours of the morning of February the 19th, Israeli Zionist warplanes launched missiles at a number of sites in Syria. Imagine this, after an earthquake on the 6th of February, and then multiple aftershocks that have continued the devastation of this country and the trauma and the stress for the population, now rendered homeless again for the second or third time since 2011. Israel, while promising to send aid, is in reality bombing the population here. In Kafr Souze, which is about 15 minutes away from where I live, 5 civilians were killed, an apartment block was irreparably damaged. Now, among those civilians was a cardiologist, a pharmacist, and an engineer. The Iranian Cultural Center is about 3 blocks away from where they targeted. They also targeted Damascus Citadel, an archaeological institute where they have some of the most up-to-date equipment for investigating archaeological sites. And they destroyed a number of historic documents appertaining to the Citadel and also to Damascus. So this is eugenics. This is the destruction and the erasure of cultural identity and heritage by the Zionist entity. And of course, this has been ongoing since 2011. Now, at the same time, somebody alluded quite correctly to the fact that the West is exploiting this tragedy to effectively kickstart the war again against Syria. Why can I say that with some confidence? Because you mentioned in the Northwest, that aid is being prevented coming into Syria. Well, no, that's not true. Aid, or rather equipment, is entering the northwest through the Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is totally controlled by Al-Qaeda. In fact, historically, it has been a revenue provider for Al-Qaeda. Any humanitarian aid entering that border crossing is requisitioned by Al-Qaeda and then sold at extortionate rates to the Syrian population under their occupation.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
None of this humanitarian aid generally will get to the Syrian people in the areas that they control, that Al-Qaeda control. However, there is now millions of funding being raised for who? For the CIA MI6 White Helmet organization, which we know to be nothing more than an auxiliary of Al-Qaeda and the various splinter armed groups. Literally 85 million from US aid, hundreds of millions pledged by their PR complex in the West. Where is this money going? This money is not coming in for, as they claim, heavy machinery. Leading up to 2022, US aid had already provided $25.2 million in funding for heavy machinery and equipment for the White Helmets. So this funding that is now being raised by the West is effectively to rearm and reinforce the armed groups in the Northwest, to restart the military campaign against now an even more fragile Syrian state. We saw literally 2 days after the first earthquake on the 6th of February, the breakout from Raju prison in the north of Afrin, which is under the control of the Turkish intelligence agencies, of ISIS terrorists that we also know to be, for certain, a proxy of the United States and its allies in the globalist cartel. And at least 2 attacks have been carried out against civilians in the east of Homs since the earthquake. In both occasions, dozens of civilians were kidnapped, and the last attack, we know that 53 civilians, not military soldiers or armed forces, civilians were murdered while they were truffle hunting to the east of Homs. We know that the United States is effectively now transferring ISIS, as it has been doing, of course, since it's had control of the northeast. It effectively ferries ISIS backward and forwards across the Iraqi border. Now it's sending them to Ukraine. But we see now that the entire military effort, or proxy military effort, is being re-energized and resurrected by the West, because they see an opportunity to now militarily strike again at Syria. And the attack by the Zionist entity is a part of this campaign. It can't be separated. There are also NGOs in the Northwest, like the Molhan team, which is raising money for the armed groups, we have to assume. And we know now in the last 2 days that Israel has opened a bank account especially to be funding this NGO in the Northwest. So the tentacles of the Zionist entity and the Western, the Anglosphere cabal are now reaching out to try and militarily destroy Syria. The West basically wants Syrians dead, and sanctions have not worked. Syrians are resilient, they're resourceful, and despite the fact that 90% of the population is below the poverty level, they have survived. Now they have, whether it's man-made or it's natural, they have a terrible humanitarian tragedy. 5 million estimated homeless in Syria, Syria real, and even in the Northwest, which, as I said, is under the control of the Western-backed terrorist groups. It is a humanitarian tragedy, but the West is not helping. Who is coming to the aid of Syrians? Russia, Iran, Algeria, Armenia, Venezuela, Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hashd al-Shabi from Iraq. The allies, the non-aligned bloc, effectively has defied the Caesar sanctions and has not been punished for it so far. Of course, we don't know what will happen in the future. But I think what it has done is to draw the battle lines. It's drawn the lines where we can see very clearly the countries that are prepared to challenge US, Zionist, and UK, EU hegemony in the region. And what Syria needs now is, yes, for the sanctions to be lifted, but more than anything, it needs American US occupation ended, not forgetting, of course, that they also occupy the southeast in their Al Tanef military base, which also controls the Rukban refugee camp, has established a 55-kilometer no entry zone around it, where it's training and arming armed groups, including ISIS. So end the occupation, please.
Thank you.
Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, or a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
The most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
Yahoo! Yahoo!
Israeli military caught up in divide over Netanyahu's plan. And from memo, Israeli Ben Gvir orders demolition of Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem during Ramadan. Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir ordered police to continue the demolition of illegally built Palestinian homes in occupied East Jerusalem during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, Israeli public broadcaster reported Monday. Ramadan, during which Muslims fast from dawn to sunset, is set to start later this month, Anadolu news agency reports. Israel did not carry out home demolitions during Ramadan in the past years to avoid tensions with the Palestinians. While Palestinians see Israel's demolition policy as an attempt to drive them out of East Jerusalem and strengthen the Israeli occupation of the city, Israeli authorities consider these houses illegally built without a permit. Meanwhile, Israeli newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth said Israeli police warned Ben Gvir that the fasting month of Ramadan could be extremely volatile, as they are already stretched to the limit amid tensions across the occupied West Bank. Ben Gvir holds far-right views on the Palestinians and has called for their displacement. He's repeatedly joined Israeli settlers in storming the Flashpoint Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in Al-Quds. In November 2022, the Zionist president Isaac Herzog warned in a leak audio that the whole world is worried about Ben Gvir's far-right news. The Zionists occupied Al-Quds during the 1967 war. It annexed the entire city in 1980 in a move never recognized by the international community. International law regards both the West Bank and Al-Quds as occupied territories and considers all Jewish settlement building activity there illegal. Israel's Ben Gvir orders home demolitions in East Al-Quds during Ramadan. Despite warnings from security agencies of possible flare-up, National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir ordered the police to continue the demolition of homes in Al-Quds even during the month of Ramadan. The Zionist National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir has reportedly instructed police in occupied Palestine to carry out demolitions of homes during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which begins on March 22nd and which could ignite more flare-ups between the Zionists and the Palestinians. The Zionist public broadcaster Khan reported that Ben Gvir, a far-right ultranationalist figure in the Benjamin Netanyahu government, ordered the demolition of illegally constructed homes in East Jerusalem, an especially sensitive point in Palestinian neighborhoods where restrictions mount and licenses to build homes are rarely granted by Israel. Israel occupied Al-Quds in 1967 along with the West Bank and Gaza. Since then, an estimated 58,000 settlers' homes have been built in Al-Quds compared with just 600 Palestine dwellings. Daniel Seidman, an Israeli lawyer specializing in Al-Quds, told the Washington Post last month. And from Middle East Eye, Israel to continue demolishing Palestinian homes during Ramadan. Ben Gvir insists police continue inflammatory practice in East Al-Quds despite warnings of security officials. Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir demanded on Monday that the police continue demolishing Palestine homes during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. In the past, the Zionists have refrained from demolishing Palestinian houses in the occupied West Bank and Al-Quds during Ramadan to avoid inflaming tensions. Demolishing homes in occupied territory is a war crime. This year, however, the Zionist media reported that police will follow Ben Gvir's demands and demolish Palestinian homes in Al-Quds during the holy month, when in recent years tensions have risen over Zionist violations at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israel demolishes Palestinian homes for various reasons, including claims they were built without permits that are near impossible to obtain from Zionist authorities. Often, the Zionists demolish the homes of suspected Palestinian attackers' families in a policy condemned by the right group or the rights groups as collective punishment. The Times of Israel reported that Zionist police have warned Ben Gvir that the force is already stretched to the limit, and the approaching Ramadan period, which coincides with the Jewish holiday of Passover, could be highly volatile. Ramadan is expected to begin on 23 March, while Passover is set for 5 April. In a closed-door meeting, Israeli security services warned Ben Gvir that demolishing Palestine homes during Ramadan could tip the West Bank into unrest. 2 years ago, Zionist violations in Al-Quds during Ramadan, including the attempted expulsion of families in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, sparked Hamas rocket barrages and Zionist bombing campaign in Gaza, and rights and riots in mixed Palestinian Jewish cities in Palestine. Over 11 days, 274 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces, 243 in Gaza alone, and 13 were killed on the Israeli side. In a leaked recording on Sunday published in Zionist media, Ben Gvir is heard sharply criticizing Zionist security officials for their intention to stop Jews from entering Al-Aqsa Mosque's courtyard for 10 days as absolute madness and surrender to terrorism. The Israeli security services, in a separate meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, advised that there is a consensus in the security services that the law enforcement operations initiated by Ben Gvir in Al-Quds must be halted. Earlier this year, Ben Gvir entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque courtyards in a highly provocative move. His actions were widely condemned. Al-Aqsa Mosque is one of the holiest sites in Islam and the site of the Jewish temple destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. Since Israel occupied the site following the 1967 war, Jewish prayer at the site has been officially forbidden, though far-right settlers such as Ben Gvir, some of whom want to demolish Al-Aqsa and replace it with a third Jewish temple, have frequently prayed there under heavy security backing in recent years. Recent weeks have seen a spike in tensions which culminated in an Israeli soldier rampage in the Palestinian village of Huwara. At least one Palestinian was killed and nearly 400 wounded in the attacks on Huwara and other West Bank towns and villages. Palestinian health officials said occupiers completely burnt down at least 35 homes and 40 others were partially damaged, and many of the buildings were set on fire, while Palestine inhabitants sheltered inside. More than 100 cars were burnt or otherwise destroyed. Hundreds of Zionist occupiers flanked by soldiers attacked Palestine towns and villages near Nablus following a shooting that killed 2 Israelis in Huwara town earlier that day. Zionist far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich called on the state of Israel to wipe out the Palestinian village of Huwara in the wake of the violent rampage. At least 65 Palestinians have been killed by Zionists this year, at a rate of more than 1 fatality per day. Meanwhile, 13 Israelis and 1 police officer have been killed by Palestinians in the same period. This follows a steep increase in violence in 2022, when at least 167 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the highest death toll in these territories is in a single year since the Second Intifada. Palestinian attacks killed 30 Israelis last year. And watch this space. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, or a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Be right back. And from the Palestine Chronicle, the PA says Israel did not meet Aqaba promise to release withheld Palestinian funds. Israel has not fulfilled the promise it made during the Aqaba talks a few weeks ago to release withheld Palestinian money, Palestinian Authority Civil Affairs Minister Hussein al-Sheikh said on Saturday. They promised at Aqaba that they'd transfer all the funds, but as of now, we have not gotten anything, al-Sheikh told the Times of Israel. Al-Sheikh's the Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization's Executive Committee and is one of PA President Mahmoud Abbas's closest advisors. He said there are currently millions of dollars being held by the Israeli side, which promised both before Aqaba and at Aqaba itself to release them. Meanwhile, Israel's National Security Advisor Zachi Hanegbi said the issue of withheld PA money was not discussed at all at this stage. Last month, the PA announced that Israel had deducted 267 million shekels from the monthly tax revenues it collected on Ramallah's behalf. This came following a pledge made by the Israeli Foreign Minister Bezalel Smotrich to double the monthly amount of Palestinian revenue that Israel seizes. And from Barat Times, top Abbas aide says Israel hasn't fulfilled a Aqaba promise to transfer withheld PA funds. Israel has committed at a regional summit on Sunday to transfer millions of dollars in tax revenue it has withheld from the cash-strapped Palestinian Authority, a top Palestinian Authority official said on Saturday. PA Civil Affairs Minister Hussein al-Sheikh told the Times of Israel in a rare interview with the Israeli media on Saturday they promised in the Kaaba that they would transfer all the money, but so far we received nothing. Al-Sheikh also serves as Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization Executive Committee and is one of the PA President Mahmoud Abbas's closest advisors. A commitment to transfer the withheld tax revenue was not included in the joint communique that the sides signed and released to the public after the Israeli, Palestinian, U.S., Egyptian, and Jordanian officials met in Aqaba, Jordan at the first political gathering of its kind in years on 26 February. Such a commitment would go against the policies of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new hardline government, which has expanded the amount of money withheld from the PA due to those convicted of terror crimes and payments to the families of slain attackers. Al-Sheikh lamented that even the commitments made in writing in the communique were not being taken seriously by the Israeli government. This, he said, was jeopardizing a planned followed-up gathering in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, later this month. With regard to tax revenue, the senior PA official said that currently we have millions being organized by Israel, which promised before Aqaba and in Aqaba itself. Responding to al-Sheikh's claim, National Security Advisor Zachi Hanegbi, who led the Israeli delegation at the Aqaba meeting, said that the issues of tax revenue was not discussed at this level at all. It'll be discussed in the future by civil committee, while being and will be discussed. It will be discussed in the future by the civil committee, will be discussed by which was established at the Aqaba meeting. Get announced last month, Israel cut NIS $260 million or $78 million from that's the new Israeli shekel, 260 million new Israeli shekels or $78 million from the monthly tax revenue it collects from Ramallah, with the unusually high cut attributed to a decision by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, and the decision was to double the amount of Palestinian revenue to be confiscated by Israel. Al-Sheikh calls Smotrich a terrorist, tells of his comments earlier this week in which he called for the Palestinian city of Hawara to be wiped out. The senior PA minister said the whole world needs to stand against these comments, and I hope they don't find a platform in the U.S. If a Palestinian minister was, Allah forbid, asked to annihilate a Jewish town, what would be the reaction? Prime Minister Netanyahu, how can Prime Minister Netanyahu make such a person a partner in his government, al-Sheikh asked. It's the finance minister who's responsible for the Palestinian money that's transferred from Israel to the PA. Al-Sheikh stated that under no circumstances would PA work with Smotrich, explaining that he uses a direct channel in Netanyahu's office. Actually, the Prime Minister put signature on Hanegbi had opened a communication link with Al-Sheikh 2 months before the establishment of the new Israeli government. Al-Sheikh and Hanegbi were both in Aqaba for the 26 February summit, after which the two sides issued a joint communique stopping discussion of any new settlement units for 4 months and any outposts for 6 months, included an Israeli commitment to prevent the authorization thereof. Amidst fears of what would be perceived as a commitment to halt deal building, Netanyahu issued a statement hours after the release of the communique. It was announced that Israel had not agreed to the settlement freeze. He stressed that the statement only referred to a commitment to approving new settlements projects rather than going ahead with the construction already approved, which usually happens only years after government approval. Furthermore, the Defense Ministry body that authorizes settlement construction only meets on a quarterly basis, so the panel was not expected to meet for a further 4 months. Israel insisted after the meeting that plans to house some 10,000 settlements at the legalization of 9 West Bank outposts, which were advanced days before the Aqaba summit, would not be rolled back. However, the PA saw Israel's commitment as a temporary moratorium on approving new settlement construction, which could be extended. Al-Sheikh pointed to this line in the communique that the sides agreed to continue meeting under this formula and to expand the settlement toward a comprehensive political process to achieve a just and sustainable this translation is incorrect. Path towards peace, I guess we could say. A just and sustainable path towards peace. Meaning the beginning of peace conversation in the future. But other Israeli ministers were even more dismissive of the Aqaba summit than Netanyahu. Smotrich tweeted that he had no clue what was said at the unnecessary summit in Jordan, but vowed not to halt settlement building for a single day. What happened in Jordan, if it happened, will stay in Jordan, agreed right-wing National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir shortly after the summit. Palestinian Authority Civil Affairs Minister Hussein al-Sheikh and PA President Mahmoud Abbas in a photo posted by Al-Sheikh on May 12th, 2020. And the two attended the weekly cabinet meeting at the Prime Minister's office in Al-Quds. The remarks angered the Biden administration, which felt they at least went against the spirit of what was agreed in Aqaba, a U.S. official told the Times of Israel earlier this week. Al-Sheikh said, immediately after the summit, the Israelis started making public statements that were completely different from what we had agreed upon in Aqaba. While the communique included a commitment by the parties to hold a follow-up meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, the PA minister said the Palestinians would only attend the meeting if Israel reached Aqaba. We want commitment from the Americans, Egypt, and Jordan. They'll hold Israel accountable. The sides also agreed to work immediately to end the unilateral measures for a period of 3 to 6 months, the release said. Sheikh said he handed out the Israelis a list of 13 unilateral measures that PA was demanding it stop, including settlement expansion, outpost legalization, IDF raids in Palestinian-controlled areas of the West Bank, home demolitions, evictions, settlement violence, and violations for the status quo on Temple Mount. He added that Israel is capable of submitting its own list, but has yet to do so. When asked how Ramallah would respond to demands to stop stipends to Palestinians convicted of terrorism and the families of attackers, Al-Sheikh replied, "We'll discuss every matter that's brought to the table." I'll open a channel now.
Beam me up, Mr. Spark. Beam me up.
Lock on transporters. Beam us up.
Beam us up, quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up.
Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast.
Stand by to beam us up.
Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up. Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.